Welcome, everyone, to today's session, Cybersecurity Contingency Planning 101. Are you prepared to keep cash flowing? On behalf of Becker's Healthcare, thanks for joining us today. With that, I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers. Greg Sherlock, Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at FinThrive, and Jonathan Wick, Vice President of Health Insights at FinThrive. Thank you, Greg and John, for being here today. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mariah. And thank you, Greg, for your preparation with this. And thank all of you that are on the phone for taking some time out of your very busy days to talk about, I think, a very relevant topic. We had quite a few folks registered for this, and Greg and I are excited to tell you what's going on in the market and then how to be best prepared. I don't think you know what you know, right? And there are unknowns that you don't know. And we'll walk through what that is. Some stats I'm going to go over here for a minute and then talk specifically about some of the things that have happened with Change Healthcare and Ascension, kind of two of the larger events that have kind of sentinel events, I would call them, in the last quarter or so. This is alarming to me. I shared this with Greg earlier in the year, and him and I were kind of looking at it going, wow. And it doesn't seem to be getting any better. What you hear mostly, too, I think, when these cyber attacks happen is how it happened and how much ransom was paid and all of that. There isn't a ton of dialogue out there about that orange line, which really is this personal health information. There was 4 terabytes at the Change Healthcare event, for example, that Alpha Black Cat managed to get at. And what's happening with that data? What's the impact? What's the identity theft, the financial or personal or privacy implications of that is something that I always want to keep at the ground as we're looking, because I think that's very, very important. We're going to talk a lot about cyber resiliency and how that impacts specifically areas of revenue cycle and keeping cash flowing. But this is not a good trend. It's projecting to be about 145 ransomware attacks this year. We're already a little over half of that going forward, and we're going to breach that 120 or 145 million, PHI being exposed as well. So I will keep recording this information, understanding it where it's at. The sources are there below as you're looking. You don't want to end up necessarily where Mr. Whitty has ended up here in Congress. I think this was a pretty, deep and I would argue rough day for the United Health Group CEO in terms of defending what will probably go down in history, one of healthcare's largest breaches. He was answering some really, really tough questions from the Senate Finance Committee surrounding how did this happen, what was the entry point of it. I've got some detailed slides on that. He was very apologetic and has said that United Health Group and Change, for that matter, have made significant strides and steps since this event to prevent it to the best they can going forward at Optum and others. I think we've only seen, at least in the first quarter, my opinion is that there's more to coming out of this in terms of just as we start peeling away the layers and understanding what's going on and what happened. We'll start to understand what that means. And I've got some slides too on what does that look like from the different kind of stakeholders in the market, whether you be a health information technology company like FinThrive, and Greg will get into some of the things that we're doing, or maybe you're a provider or a health system or a multi-specialty clinic, or maybe you're a payer that's listening today, or an attorney or whoever. Just what are all the different pieces and what do we expect to see going forward? Well, let's talk about what happened with Change Healthcare a little bit. There's a lot going on the slide. I'm not going to read it to you. You're listening to a Becker's webinar, so you're all wicked brilliant folks that can see it. But this started back in September. United Health Group put an announcement and unplugged the Change software solutions that were impacted. Most business partners and others that were connected rapidly disconnected as well. And then you started seeing kind of inquiries come from the associations, AHA, MGMA, and then, typical with these ransomware attacks, there's folks that claims responsibility, there's payments going back and forth, and then a timetable was announced from United surrounding this CHOPS program, or the Change Healthcare Outage Payment Distribution is what that stands for, program. OCR opened an investigation in March. CMS issued some guidance for payment. I think everyone was really concerned about how we get claims and to some extent eligibility back online to where claims can get out the door, be it whatever model, paper, plastic, through the portal, or through other options to get that going. And that was a matter of weeks, but there's still, from what I understand, some level of things that are having to get reconciled from a remittance and payment standpoint. Most of the stuff's over the wall from a claim standpoint. And then, we just got to figure out where we're at from the rest of this. The federal government's gotten involved. The bill proposed by Democrat out of Virginia, Senator Warner, setting some requirements for companies such as FinThrive and others in terms of what's happening. There are 6 class action lawsuits pending with change. I think that number will probably go up. United has announced in late March that the attestation was complete and they're going to fire everything back up. They've shelled out about $5 billion as of April payments. I believe that number is closer to 8 now. And they are looking to understand exactly what it looks like from a scope standpoint as they move forward. And they learned, I think, something that was very important is that MFA, or multifactor authentication, wasn't enabled in one of the legacy systems on the change side. And that caused a relatively easy door to open. And Greg's more of an expert in that area than I am, for a bad guy or girl to get in there and start tooling around. But I'll let you guys look at this stuff. Some of those green things up there absolutely are links to that you can go to when you get a copy of these slides. Then, short 60 days later, we saw Ascension have the same thing happen. I saw something in the news, I think it was Monday of this week, that they have restored their EHRs, but they were down for a little over a month. We're learning more as we go. They've engaged many consulting firms. I don't think anything's off base these days. And Greg's going to end this presentation with about 6 or 7 slides about some best practices and what organizations, be it public, private, on the provider side or the business partner side, what you can do or be aware of or mindful of as you're going. And you kind of have to put your best kind of foot forward. It's an investment, but I think there's always going to be some level of risk in terms of these things. And it's the crisis du jour too, I think, for the bad guys. They know folks are going to pay the ransoms. There's a big debate out there, if you go look it up, about whether or not that's the right thing to do too. We don't negotiate with terrorists, right? You don't know right. if that's something that we should be looking at going forward also. So there's some information here just on what happened at Ascension, and there's a story there that you could look at. AHA did a really nice survey, I thought, surrounding what was happening relatively quickly, and they got a pretty high response rate. 1,000 hospitals had answered. 3/4 of them reported that this was directly impacting patient care on some level. They were having extraordinary reductions in cash flow. There's some really interesting studies out there looking at the dollars and things that were stuck during that time. The majority, 94%, reported this is absolutely impacting them financially with significant or serious implications. 1 in 3 indicated the attack has disrupted more than half of their revenue. They've implemented workarounds. Some had professional clearinghouses that they just cut over to. Some had portals and went there. Some went completely to paper. Some didn't do anything and just put everything in a can and unscrewed it 30 days later and dumped it back out and submitted. It was kind of all over the place. And I think the market and FinThrive and others have learned what did work, what didn't work, what are the financial implications of that. We'll talk about the importance of having standby systems that you can maybe fail over to ensure your par level of your cash stays where it's at, those types of things. Somewhat effective response. I think we were all very surprised by it happening. Not the fact that does happen, but the impact of it, and that having sole solutions or sole connections certainly does expose the operations financially to more implications than what we've normally seen. This is a nice study by Strata Decisions. I like this. They talked about, what was the actual kind of share of the claims inventory that was hit. And I like how they kind of put it in these 4 tranches of $500 million to $1 billion, $1 billion to $2.5 billion, and then greater than $2.5 billion buckets of size. And the range was, right in that 17% range in terms of payments that were impacted in the first quarter of the year. That's a lot, gang. If you think about your personal finances or even your business finances, 1 in 5 of your dollars were stuck for a period of 60 to 90 days. That starts to impact things. And I heard and a lot of sources out there have talked about the CHOPS program, that outage program, that United Health Group, the calculations that were being used, some of the things that were being applied were not close to what the historical payments were. So that created a cash deficit and a day's cash on hand issue. Bond covenants in some cases were violated or certainly threatened, which impacted a hospital's capital ability to borrow in some areas. And for the most part, I think this cash kind of event has ebbed back. It certainly it certainly tsunamied in, but we're into June now. Most of it is known, I would say, and then it has some quick path to mitigation, if not already mitigated, i.e. the claims were already submitted. Some of the payments are already coming back, if not all, and that bubble in the hose, if you will, is starting to spray back out the other side, and cash is flowing in the way that it needed to again. But it certainly did disrupt Q1 financials pretty significantly. On the MFA thing, I love this article from Healthcare Excellence and Executive Insights from Healthcare Media. It talks through diligence, risk assessments, and Greg's going to get into some of these things and understanding that, I'll talk about redundancy and how we have that in the clinical area, but do we have that in our financial areas to the level that we have them in some of our clinical areas in the hospital? You're going to see this MFA push. And I think that's pretty true. Most of us that are even consumers are used to sending that little text code to our phone, right? And typing that in on a website. A lot of software today does not have that. And they're going to look at that. And I think healthcare is one of those areas that falls into that. And you'll start seeing some more legislation as we move forward. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. I know this is a super saturated slide, and it's violating my own kind of covenants in presenting information to you. But I really liked, understanding what is happening in the short and long term and in what market, right? So providers absolutely in that upper left corner were scrambling to get claims out the door. And now I think they're scrambling somewhat to get those ones that they submitted in a non-traditional way reconciled to the traditional way that they had. And that's pushes over to that long term. So what does that backlog look like? What do those paper remittances look like? What's their ERA, EFT, and their automated clearinghouse, in terms of the checks coming back and out, in and out? What does that look like for them? Long term, absolutely. And Greg's going to expand on this. Look at vendor management, understanding what that cybersecurity assessment is. FinThrive has absolutely been fielding, rightfully so, different assessments and requirements and attestations from very large health systems in terms of our ability to fight off or defend cyber attacks and more importantly, I think, address them when they occur in early identification and mitigation as we move forward. And business continuity plans and those things, I think, are something that if you're a provider on the phone, absolutely should be taking stake in your vendor inventory and understanding how well they can or can't do this and what your risks of exposure look like. Secondary clearinghouses, we're going to spend a little bit of time on that here in a minute, just talking about that concept, because I think it's relatively new in the market. And we'll talk through what it means to have a standby claims or standby eligibility system. You'll also see some litigation, and you saw the OCRs involved. I think you'll see class action lawsuits and those things from providers for, they may even be submitting some FEMA claims. Certainly, maybe an insurance claim for the MGNA, understanding where they're at. On the payer side, they actually were more amiable than typical in this event. Usually the payers are like, that's awful, good luck with that. But they actually did some proactive research or reach out and said, hey, how could we help? Those outside of Optum as well. But they said, we'll extend the out of timely filing requirements. We realize that you're not getting, active scrubbing on some of these paper things, so we'll understand where you're at. I'd be interested to hear as we get to the Q&A at the end if you felt the payers were better, worse, or same as we went through that. If you're a provider or if you're a payer on the phone, would love to hear about some of the things that you did to help the providers kind of get through this downtime of sorts as they went. They all saw about a 20% reduction in volumes. That translates well to that cash deficit that we saw earlier from Strata. And it was not comical, I guess, but it was interesting to me that 20 years ago we were very familiar with submitting UB04s via paper and having an OCR reader convert that to a PDF and then looking at it and then typing it in. This was like we hadn't ridden a bike before. It was very difficult for the industry to switch back from an electronic workflow to paper, and that was felt on both the provider and the payer side. This was amplified in pharmacy, and it was also amplified in the VA plans. So there was a bolus of held claims, and that of course translates to held payments, and we'll see that kind of play itself out, I think, for the rest of this quarter. The regulators absolutely got involved early. That you saw the congressional hearing there with Mitty and others. You will see a lot of 3-letter and 4-letter words coming out of Washington in terms of people that are getting involved. The FTC, the FDA, the OIG are all going to, the DOJ are all going to get involved and look at this from multiple levels in terms of violation of privacy, violation of business transactions, sustainability in the economy, those types of things. And the companies that do SOX and interoperability requirements from the Office of the National Coordinator will all look at this very, very closely and understand. I think you're going to see quite a bit of regulation. That's like the one thing healthcare doesn't need, but I think you're going to see a large wave of administrative requirements coming to both the vendor and payer side out of this into next year. It'll obviously kind of take a little bit of a hiatus here in the fall as we get through a presidential election. But I guarantee you those agencies that are operating under whichever president and cabinet that we have will be picking this back up again if they don't continue the momentum through to look at it. United Healthcare Optum change certainly was micro-surgically focused on getting the claims clearinghouse back up as soon as possible. It took them about 2 to 3 weeks and did attestations, and that's where they ended up. They're obviously looking at the vulnerabilities now per that testimony to the Senate Finance Committee, which I encourage you to go read. It's a fascinating transcript to understand what's happened, what they're doing going forward, just the size of Optum and United Health Group as a company with its change operations, which is very, very interesting. I do think you'll see a Department of Justice investigation out of this. This hasn't started already. We'll be interested to see what the findings of that look like. And then finally, business partners like FinThrive and ourselves, our company I was very proud of how we, threw as many life rings out into the ocean as we could as folks were sinking without a claims clearinghouse. We tried to help as many as we could to code over to ours. I think many other companies did that as well, just to try to help providers continue to keep cash flowing. And we'll talk about how you can do that kind of in a preventative manner here in a minute. We, as a company, and lots of others, I think, are going through cyber reviews and infrastructure, and Greg's going to get into that pretty deeply. He's our CISO, and he's a wealth of information as we're talking through what companies should and shouldn't do, and where we're at, and what we're doing. We're putting a forum together as well, and I think that's it. Platform is something I do want to talk about as well. As you have more nodes, more vendors out there. My hospital had 26. We've done surveys at FinThrive where there's 20 to 30, typically, in a large health system, helping bills go, for lack of a better way of putting it. That is a hub and spoke footprint of exposure. So having a platform allows that to at least be isolated, and then having some redundancy within that platform, I'll talk about here in a minute, is important as well. We have transitioned over to this long-term side. I think that's important to understand that most, as I've mentioned, the claims have been resolved. I think most of the crisis has passed. Now it's like, okay, that happened. We learned a lot. What can we do to prevent it next time? Let's take an inventory of where we're at. Let's start looking at redundancy and those types of things. Kaufman Hall had a really interesting statement in its latest flash report where they said that hospitals should be paying special attention to how they're dealing with cyber hygiene and the risk of potential contamination and interactions with third-party vendors and other partners. And they also, and we're going to talk about this today, diversify clearinghouses. I have not seen that statement in my career where diversification of clearinghouses, having secondary or backup or standby clearinghouses to fire up when your primary goes down to make sure that your claims and your cash is not impacted, is something that Kaufman Hall said that is very important to look at as we move forward. Why is that? Well, if you're not an RCM in it a lot, this is kind of the wheel of the claim or the patient account life cycle, I like to call it. And these little red X's here indicate what gets unplugged when you lose an eligibility or claims clearinghouse. And it's the kitchen sink, gang. There really isn't a way to do business if you can't run eligibility and can't submit and receive claims in an electronic way without having to turn the place upside down and calling in overtime and looking at that. In my conversations with hospital leadership, we have heard of the overtime and the times that folks had to do to convert their processes from one that was fairly automated to manual. And that's why the software and the solutions were put in place in the first place. But from your 270, 271 eligibility transactions to your 837, 835 claims, to your ERAs and EFTs, all the way up to data and analytics, that's all stuck. And I would argue some of those things in that mauve color in the upper left corner, you're going to have kind of this blip like we had in COVID, a carved out quarter where things just look weird because they're not being submitted or received in the normal channels, and that'll impact analytics and some of the KPIs going forward. Some of the impacts in a hospital of having these claims payments, there is certainly delaying insurance and follow-up. We talked about that 17% risk of bad debt. You didn't know an auth was required or an auth was required. You didn't know if it was there or not. It went out on a paper claim. Maybe the carrier changed or the coverage changed. A lot of overtime expense, as I mentioned. That causes a lot of issues when you're having to go back and rework or manually do a process versus in cutting over to a standby solution. So it's important to understand that a lot of this can be mitigated if you have a system that you could fail over to quickly. I'm going to spend a minute and talk about redundancy. And this is an OR suite. I've been in one in my career several times. As weird as it sounds, it was actually one of my favorite places to go visit. It's life-saving at the elbow, helped with our PAC systems and other types of things as they're using imaging technology or stealth technology to locate tumors and things. And anytime I got invited to surgery, I loved putting on the scrubs and going in there and helping the docs out because you don't get as close to that anymore. And I'm certainly further away from it now in my role. Nonetheless, you can see the levels of redundancy here. There's redundancy in personnel. There's redundancy in computers. There's redundancy in lights. And you can't unplug this. You can't, if the surgeon fails, it's a lot like an airline. You got to have a co-pilot. If the anesthesiologist is not there, or that pump fails, or the monitors fail, that's a really big deal. So there's lots of people standing at the ready and lots of kind of duplicative equipment to allow for that redundancy. And what I'd like to talk about today is, does that level of redundancy exist in your hospital? And as you're looking at, your level of power and water and internet and things that come in, I know those are redundant. I've worked in a hospital, but they're putting in a new, building across the street or replacing something and the tractor hits the pipe. Those pipes have secondary entries. There's a backup generator for power. There's a secondary chiller for water. There's typically an offsite, large area network data center that's different. Do you have that level of redundancy within your RCM as well? Is a question I want to talk about for a minute. I know you have it with the EHR, but when you start looking at some of the eligibility and claims processes that are there, what is your level of exposure? I think, like I said, we learned a lot when these events have happened. I think Ascension learned a lot as well when their EHR went down. What are things that we could have kept doing to keep the lights on and keep business going from a revenue cycle or finance standpoint? It's going to have an impact, but how do we mitigate that to the minimal amount that we can going forward? Eligibility and clearinghouse sole provider risks are huge. Reliance on vendors that maybe aren't secure, having a lack of redundancy, results in these manual submittals of claims. And there certainly is an urgency now. We're we're seeing that in the market to change clearinghouse. I'm going to show you some data here in a minute, where before it was like, oh, I can't touch my clearinghouse. We've had it for 15 years. It's not something that we can just kind of unplug and plug back in, where you're seeing folks, well, maybe we can't do that, but maybe we should at least have something sitting next to it to cover it if it ever does have an impact. And these can be running up and running in a matter of days. I want to talk to you just for a minute about the revenue cycle technology adoption model that we created with HFMA. I don't have the time today, in respect to Greg's time and the rest of the time, to go onto a deep dive. I just wanted to expose you to it. We certainly can reach out to me or FinThrive afterwards and talk through it, or HFMA for that matter, and look at what the revenue cycle management technology adoption model is. We're talking about it at Becker's in October out there at the RCM conference. Again, I think we talked about it last year. We certainly were at the CIO one as well. But we basically took a tech stack, a revenue cycle, asked the market what solutions they feel are valuable or not, and then whether or not they were in place or not, and then color coded them into mission critical and high value, and then added some staging to that, depending on how many solutions were in place at each organization or not. And that's an assessment that your organization could take for free as well if you're interested in doing it. And there's no obligation from us at FinThrive. It's just something that you can do to kind of understand your strategic planning. My point in bringing it up here is that claims is part of that stage 2 mission critical function. And I think you guys know that. And I think you understand that you have to have electronic claims or a claims clearinghouse to do business today as a provider. You could try to do it via paper, but it just doesn't work as efficiently. And you must have that, and that's part of this model as well, as understanding where you're at. It's very early in the model is my point. And I wouldn't be surprised as the model evolves, we start looking at, do you have a secondary or standby or backup clearinghouse as well to mitigate as you're moving forward. 91% of providers that were impacted by the cybersecurity event are looking at a replacement or secondary clearinghouse. That is an amazing statistic to me. 91%. This was a study from Tarpon Health, and there's about 51 hospitals participating in this. We've got other surveys out there as well that we can share, but I just like that stat and understanding that the market has certainly moved. I'm going to finish up here by talking about standby eligibility solutions, and then Greg's going to get into cybersecurity. But it's important to understand that this is a relatively new area, right? It's not new for FinThrive, but it's certainly something that you should think about as a provider. Is what is your standby process? It should not be paper or portal. That is an inefficient, I would argue, somewhat dangerous and financially impactful in a detrimental standpoint way of handling a downtime that can happen from a cyber event. And many hospitals are seeing that. I think tech companies are seeing it as well. So it's a fairly inexpensive and simple, and I would argue elegant way to back up your systems, where we all are familiar with that term backup. This is a way of doing it. On the eligibility side, best practices employ real-time natural disaster recovery solutions to take over in case that primary fails. The data systems configurations are automatically backed up. In the event of that secondary system failure, it returns to operations within 24 hours, not 3 weeks, but a day. And as we talked about, it takes a few days to set something like this up. 3 to 5 typically is what we've been seeing. They're synchronized across, and it's basically, think of it as a power generator. Like if you're in Florida and there's a hurricane, power goes out, this fires up, you don't lose power. Your eligibility goes out, you're able to run it the next day. It's there, up and running, integrated to your system. Same deal with claims. Standby option in case your current structure experiences a system failure, like we saw. Restore operation in a matter of hours, a few days, depending on what's happening. Cut over partially or entirely. Hey, we just want our HB claims to drop. We just want our claims to these payers to drop electronically. We want it to run side by side as we go, just so we have, maybe our inventory split in half, so that our exposure is always only half. Many different configuration options as you move forward. Benefits are here: reducing denials, getting your AR days down to those 40s, getting a clean claim rate in the high 99, 98%, getting time to payment within that 30 days, lower costs, eliminating unnecessary follow-up, which I think is one of the biggest points in this, is having to go back and rework things. while you're in a cash deficit. Hospitals are staffed to keep the lights on. They are not staffed for crisis, and we learned that through lots of things in the last few years. Complex reporting, errors, compliance issues, redundancy, we talked about that as well, and manual work. Get that clean claim rate up. Make sure your reimbursement and cash flow is not impacted. And more importantly, I don't think anybody likes the downtime, but think about your staff in this, right? Like, oh, hey, we got a backup system. Awesome. I can keep doing work the way I was trained and know how versus trying to pick up a manual process. That would ruin most of my registrar's days when I was running my revenue cycle. I'm going to turn it over to Greg now, and Greg's going to talk through cybersecurity. Greg, I'll let you drive with that oval at the bottom, and Greg, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate it. All right, I'm going to talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about some cybersecurity considerations, some of the things that we've done at FinThrive in response to not only change and other events, but just in the industry as a whole. We're seeing, as Jonathan had mentioned earlier, we're seeing a large number of attacks come across. A lot of our customers, or some of our customers, are being hit. We're seeing these events constantly across the board. Being told, hey, we have a cyber incident. We wanted you to be aware of that. So FinThrive has made some investments and made some changes to improve our security posture so that we can protect your data as well. And so one of the things that we're doing at FinThrive is we're not just checking the box anymore. I know a lot of organizations, and I've been doing this for quite a while, they say, hey, we have a security guy or a security girl, and that's our security team, right? At FinThrive, and I'm assuming many other organizations are taking a look at what they're doing and beefing up their security teams and their security programs. But some of the things that we're doing, we have an internal SOC team. We used to outsource it, but we're finding that when we have an internal team, they can concentrate more on FinThrive solutions and pay attention strictly on what is happening at FinThrive. Not to knock any outsourcing organizations, but you are sharing your time with other companies, and so we wanted to make sure that when a security event occurs, our team is right on it and right on top of it. I'm not going to go through this entire slide, but we do have strict compliance with NIST, CSF, High Trust, SOC, ENAC, and others. We do have a security-first culture. That is very important to FinThrive. It's very important to the senior and executive leadership. If we don't have that security-first mindset, everything falls by the wayside. And so we want to make sure that FinThrive is thinking about security, and we're talking. Not only are we talking the talk, but we're walking the walk. On this right-hand side, this just gives you a heads up on what FinThrive's security program is. We have roughly 25 security professionals reporting into me. We have four different teams: security operations, engineering, application security, and risk management. Those teams are looking at FinThrive, its systems, and the data. So going back to certifications, we're across the board. We have SOC 1, SOC 2, High Trust, ENAC, it's now called Direct Trust, and Texas RAMP. We're constantly looking at new or at adding other products to the certification list here, but that's it's going to occur at some point with most of these products. But for now, these are the ones that we're hitting, and these are the ones that had the highest impact. Incident response. FinThrive aligns with NIST 861 Rev 2. We have annual testing of that incident response plan, and we review that incident response plan for any improvements that we want to make on it. That IR team is led by me with executive leadership pulled in so that they are a part of that incident response. When we have an event, or if we have an event, it's all hands on deck here. In terms of redundancy, FinThrive has a multi-cloud infrastructure. We have 2 data centers, one in Lewisville, Texas, and another in Phoenix. That's our data center. And then we're also a Microsoft Azure first organization where everything is moving up to Azure. For those that are still sitting in the data center, there are plans to move them up, but there may be some technical requirements that are keeping us in those data centers, but at some point we are moving up to Azure. We do have one product sitting in AWS as well, and we're looking at that and moving to AWS at some point for some of the products. In addition, we have a 24/7 global ops center that is monitoring our systems and monitoring the data as it's going in and out. This is our approach. This is how FinThrive is hosting its systems. Azure, we have Azure Data Center and AWS. Some are hybrid of both Azure and our data center. We have one product, like I said, is on AWS. So building that cyber resilience. This is one of the things that we've seen that, as we're seeing all of these events, we want to know, how do we get there? How do we make sure that we're not falling victim to another cyber event? So one of the things we suggest that you do is align with a security framework. I strongly suspect most of you all are either aligned with High Trust or Direct Trust or ENAC, but maybe SOC 2, maybe NIST. But in any case, align with that security framework, whether or not you certify against that, or if you're just using the requirements as your standards for your policies. At FinThrive, we take the standards that we have to follow, which is ENAC, Direct Trust, SOC, and those are embedded in our policies. And whether or not a product has to be certified, it still has to comply with those three security requirements. Again, evaluate your incident response plan if you have one, right? Make sure that that incident response plan is written up. You know your crown jewels. You know that if those crown jewels are at risk, what are you doing to protect them? Conduct a risk assessment. Where in your organization are the blind spots? Where are you vulnerable? Again, going back to your crown jewels. Are they protected? Do you know what they are? Make sure that you understand what's at risk there. Review your security controls. What do you have? Do you have just a firewall? Do you have AV? Are you using MFA? Jonathan mentioned MFA being a standard. I strongly believe that MFA is going to be one of those requirements. To me, it's a security 101 type solution or type control, and I think that you're going to do yourself a huge favor by implementing MFA across the board in your environment to prevent these ransomware attacks and other types of security events. Again, create a culture of cybersecurity awareness. Conduct secure phishing tests. We just had one today at FinThrive. We do this monthly. We have other tests, other types of security tests that we go out. We have a red team. Our internal pen testing team is going out and looking at the company, looking at the products on their own and saying, hey, this is where we see you need help, and they're identifying that. We're also conducting training, constant training across the board. Make sure that your employees are aware of what security events are out there so that they can prepare themselves. They are your first line of defense, so make sure that they become your human firewall, and they're the ones that are going to alert you, or they're going to prevent these ransomware from getting inside your environment. Assess your supply chain. This is really important. I'm sure everybody is starting to look at who they're connecting to, and are they protecting you. For FinThrive, we have our supply chain just like we're part of the supply chain of another organization. So for us, we roll just like what our customers ask us to do. We roll out security questionnaires, security evaluations of our vendors. We identify those critical vendors that could sink us if they have a security incident, right? So make sure that you evaluate your vendors and that they're secure so that you can remain secure. And then finally, adopt an assumed breach mindset. I think many of us have already adopted that. And what an assumed breach mindset is that you're not trying to prevent something, or you don't think something could happen. You know a breach could occur. And that doesn't mean a breach has occurred. It just means that your mindset is a breach can occur, it's possible, and I need to do everything I could possibly do to stop that breach from occurring, which means more monitoring, which means MFA, antivirus, anti-ransomware, endpoint protection, things like that. So make sure you adopt that assume breach mindset so that you're not playing a guessing game. You recognize that it can happen, and at some point it will happen. That's a pessimistic view, but I think pessimism is really important here because we want to make sure that we're not just happy with where we are. We want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. All right, and finally, FinThrive Security Council. So FinThrive, while we believe we have a fairly strong security program and our customers have strong security programs, what we want to do is build a security council where we can bounce ideas off of one another. Not everyone has all the answers. And so that security council will create awareness amongst ourselves. We'll have discussions, frank discussions about what we're doing internally, either at FinThrive, at your organization, or at other vendors, and just talk about what can we do as a industry together. You know, we're all in this together, and so we believe bringing everyone together to have these conversations is really important to the healthcare industry. And so we're looking at setting up that security council. We believe the first meeting will be July 9th, and I think there's going to be Jonathan, are we going to have a QR code or something for people? I
think people can go to finthrive.com and find it. We'll certainly, when we send out the slides and the other things, have a link to get there.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that link will be up there. Right. Thank you for that. So in any case, we want to build that security council. We want everyone to be a part of the solution. We all don't have the answers, like I said, but together, I think we can make an impact. And with that, we're ready for questions.
Nice. Thanks, Greg.
Yes, thank you both for this excellent presentation. We do have a few questions that came in, and for everyone in the audience, there is still time. If you have questions, feel free to type them into the chat box now. The first question we have asks, what business processes in RCM are most critical and should be evaluated for redundancy?
Yeah, I think I could take that one. So, we talked about claims and eligibility. I mean, those are the meat and potatoes, if you will, of revenue cycle, right? I don't think that's a shocker to anybody that's here. As I mentioned, what I think that the reason why that question probably came in is where do you start? Well, even if between those two, I think claims is probably the most important, and the eligibility is probably secondary to that. They both are incredibly important to where you're at, but having a standby claims system in place to prevent something like happened with the Change incident is huge, because you don't have that quarter or 17% of your revenue happening. And then the eligibility standby, prevents some of that downstream authorization rework. I'm understanding the only reason you check off eligibility as an organization is really to verify coverage and benefits and understand the plan rules at that level as well, right? And not knowing if the plan is in effect and you have the right plan impacts a lot of, and cascades kind of down to a lot of different other financial clearance processes. So I would argue that claims, first and foremost, is very important to have some level of redundancy, which I would argue, if I had to throw a number out there, I bet 90% of the hospitals in this country have a sole system for claims right now. And that's scary if you think about it, if you start looking at what's happening with what happened with this event and other things. And that number should be closer to half, if not a third, in my opinion, in terms of just making sure you're have that same level of redundancy as you do in your clinical systems. And eligibility is not as much as a must-have, but it's certainly business critical, I would call it, or mission critical. You can do a patient for free all day long, is my point. It's just you're assuming some level of risk without verifying their eligibility in real time as you go forward. So those will be the two areas I think is claims and eligibility.
Excellent. The next question asks, in a few words, what will our take-home piece be from today's webinar with regards to cybersecurity considerations?
Right, I can go ahead and take that. So I think what we want to convey to you all is to have your plan. We don't want everyone to, we don't we don't want complacency. We want to make sure that we're all we have that cyber incident response plan where we're sure that we've looked at everything and that we understand where the risks are. And if an event occurs, whether it's with you or with your vendors, how are you going to respond to that? Do you have backup systems? Do you have backup routes? Are you able to transmit? Things of that nature. And Jonathan, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
I just think it's important to understand that have those par levels of clinical and financial redundancy. I think there's been a gap. Like one's always been here, and yes, clinical is the most important, and the patient's the most important. But you know, how many financial speed bumps can your shocks handle? You know, as an organization, would be my analogy I put out there. And you could buy a better shock, and you could certainly smooth out your operations by having. I think it's important to look at it. It's not a super huge investment. And it certainly, allows, for that slide I had, a lot of those kind of positives to come in terms of making sure your cash is sustained, your staff's in a good mood, because that certainly translates to patient loyalty and other things.
Appreciate those responses. The next question asks, what are some quick wins or best practices for cybersecurity for providers and technology companies?
Jonathan, you want to go? Or you want me to?
You can take that one, Greg, for now. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So some quick wins are again, having that plan. One of the big things that I strongly encourage you to do is reach out to your supply chain. Make sure that your supply chain is doing the right thing. Understand who your critical vendors are. When you know that, you can kind of guess where that risk is going to come in and where it's going to impact you. You want to understand what that business impact is. Conduct that BIA, business impact analysis, on not only that vendor but your internal systems. And so, to me, supply chain is a huge risk because they get to them, they're going to get to you, and there's a chance that they could get to you. So that, to me, understanding where that risk lies is probably a big win for you.
Excellent. The next question is, where do we see some regulatory reform coming for these ransomware attacks, and what could the industry expect?
Yeah, I can start with that one, and then Greg, if you have some stuff from a technical standpoint. I think we talked about this a little bit. I absolutely think you're going to see MFA come around and have some sort of standard. Now, as with anything that comes out of Washington, there'll be a lot of argument and discussion about exactly what that looks like and at what time and how much it costs and all that fun stuff. I agree with Greg. I think it's something that has to happen, and hopefully they can move swiftly through that, because I think it does, cork a lot of bottles, for lack of a better word. It certainly puts up another fence for you, and making sure that the person that's on the other end of that terminal is who they say they are and are accessing the systems that they should be. That I think will be first and foremost. I think you'll see, probably more requirements for testing, if I had to guess, in terms of what companies or hospitals are doing, tabletop exercises, the phishing tests that Greg mentioned today. I think you'll start seeing just, kind of real world examples. Hey, let's try to hack our own system. And the government may say, how have you done that? I think they'll look at some of the attestation organizations now, SOG and others, and High Trust, and look at that certification process, much like the Joint Commission has on the clinical side and operational side for hospitals. And if you have a High Trust certification, what are those elements in there that the HIT company kind of attested to, and how are we testing for that from a pressure standpoint? Greg, I don't know what else you might think we see at the state or federal level, but.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there, like you said, there's going to be a lot of discussion, and the federal government generally allows private industry to create their own requirements. I do believe that if we start seeing more negligence in terms of you knew about a problem but you did nothing about it until you were hit, that could cause some legislation. Just knowing and not doing about it, to me, could sink you. So I think that's something that may come out of this. I do think Security 101 is MFA, AV, just those simple things. That might be a requirement. And I don't know if there's going to be some legislation on that, maybe, but I do think that there's going to be strong looks at this. And over time, we probably will start seeing something. But it's best for the industry to get out in front of this now before we're told to do it.
Appreciate you both adding your thoughts on that one. The next question is, what's the best way to ensure executive support for security program investments?
Hey,
yes.
Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so, I didn't mean to do that. But to get that executive support, you need to lay out the risks, conduct those risk assessments, and just talk to them in plain English, saying, "Here are the risks. This is what we see." Playing, that whole "the sky is falling" thing that everyone had done in the past. That doesn't work. Just lay it out in business terms. These are the risks. This is why this is a risk. This is what could cost us, and see if you can get buy-in from there. The sky is definitely falling, but nobody likes to hear that. The trends are there that healthcare is under attack, and so use that to your advantage in a way that it helps them understand what the risks are.
Yeah, I'd add, I think, we showed some stats at the beginning too, 70% of your revenue is at risk. That's a pretty big deal when this happens. Your reputation's at risk. I think it's probably even a more important and imperative deal. No one likes their data being stolen. And when it happens, I think the patients start asking questions about what happened, where are you at? And that's an event that's not reversible. And as I mentioned, that's not being talked about a lot with these events. There's still 4 terabytes of data that the bad guys have that are sharing it with folks that will have ripple effects for, I would say, probably a decade. That's a really big deal. And I know that's Chicken Little sky is falling a little bit in cybersecurity, eye roll, whatever, but I completely agree with Greg. I think you're going to see this magnify more. The bad guys know they're getting paid. We unfortunately or fortunately, depending on what side of the fence you're on, the market is negotiating with terrorists right now, and that perpetuates this issue to some extent. So making sure that you're investing in it to the best of your ability is probably more important than ever right now. And also, I think we've became so technologically mature as a, and I use that term loosely, but as an industry, to where we're relying on these automated electronic processes much more than we did in the past. I noticed a question come through on not using paper from Rashida. I don't think you want to use paper if you don't have to. Nobody likes paper. It's an isolated sole way. Yes, it's a mechanism to do it, but that piece of paper takes longer to get there. It takes longer to process. You can't run analytics on it. It's a two-way interaction. It's binary. So you have to keep passing the ball back and forth to get answers. That's why there's electronic claims and remittances. You can't scrub it electronically typically. You can have folks convert paper claims to electronic and then do that process, which might be a better subset. But my point is, since we're reliant, probably the word I'd rather use than mature, on technological processes, it's certainly time for revenue cycle to have the level of redundancy that the clinical side has. And that has not been there. And it's time to look at it from a clearinghouse and eligibility standpoint at a minimum.
Excellent. The next question is, what do you think is the solution for live exchange eligibility data? And is it something like insurance, quote unquote, SWIFT?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'll research, and Greg, I don't know if you've heard of Insurance Swift or not. I'll go take a look after this call and make sure that we look at that. There is a live exchange for eligibility now. I know FinThrive has a portal that you can go in and type in demographic information and it returns. We've got an API and HL7 connections with most of our customers as well, to where, and that's either batch or real time, where you can ask and an answer comes back, and we're pinging all the clearinghouses and having them come. That portal is absolutely used, I think, by some of our customers as well, to kind of have a one-off. United Health Group or Change stood up a portal as well that allowed folks to key in things to check eligibility as they're going. Again, that process versus a standby solution is still more manual. You have a human typing on a key and doing keystrokes to enter. Whenever my staff had to touch a keyboard, my heart would stop. because I always worried that they're wonderful people, registrars are, and they're doing a great job. But anybody, I'm a horrible typist. I don't know how good Greg is, but anytime a human is touching a keyboard, no one's 100% accurate. And so typing in numbers, dates of birth, names in a live scenario without some verification creates danger, where you've got a standby solution that is taking information that is coming from the medical record without a human touching it and sending it over and being a backup. That affords more benefits than having you go to a live kind of one-on-one way of looking at it. But that would be my concerns with that, if that answered your question. I'll certainly look up Swift as we move forward and understand what that's at. But I hope that answered your question.
Excellent. This next question is a little bit in the same vein as the last one, and it asks, why should an organization evaluate an investment in standby claims or eligibility?
Yeah, I can start with that one, Greg, and if you have anything to add. We've talked about it, gang. I think that's a great question, and it's not something that was, I would say, palatable or on folks' minds a year ago. It just wasn't. It unfortunately, I think, took an incident like Change for folks to kind of go, whoa, that's a big deal. Like, because trust me, we're an HIT vendor. I was a hospital chief revenue officer. The clearinghouse is something that's typically legacy in most organizations. They've had it for a very long time, or at least since their last major EHR change, right? And it's kind of like the motor in the car, right? It's not something that you change out. I like giving the example that it's the kind of the stock car stereo in your car, right? You could change it out, but why? If it gets Siri FM or it's connected to Apple Car, or you've got your channels, but one of my vehicles that my son drives has an old CD player. I'm not getting them a new radio because it works, right? And your old clearinghouse may have worked. My point is that those things typically can't get hacked or go down. Clearinghouses can, and we just saw that. And so it's important to understand like a level of redundancy, and it is a pain in the butt to switch a clearinghouse in and out. So it's good to kind of have a secondary one there in case this happens. That said, clearinghouses have evolved over time too. So it's important to look at where your clearinghouse is today and understand the level of functionality and improvement that you could have in a new one. And it is becoming something that's talked about a lot more, 91% more. I showed you that slide. We've got other data that shows that too. A lot of executives are looking at this that weren't looking at it before, going, wow, this can happen, because they didn't want to go through the pain of changing that clearinghouse out. But there's an urgency to look at it now, and at the very least have a secondary system that can be stood up in a standby manner to make it work.
Great. And then the probably last question we have time for today asks, what is FinThrive doing to protect its data and technology stacks that differentiates it from other RCM vendors?
So I'll go ahead and take this question, Jonathan. I don't like to comment on what other RCM vendors are doing, and I don't like to compare. But I will say that FinThrive is taking a very proactive approach. We have that assumed breach mindset here that we know it's going to happen, so we're doing everything that we can to shore up our defenses. We're thinking of new ways to create redundancy. We're thinking of new ways to help our customers out. And so, that's, to me, that's the difference. We're just trying to make things better. We understand there's a risk. We understand there's a threat. It's not going away. There's a mindset at the top level, and the board and the executive team. There is a mindset that security first, as I've talked about before, and everything is based on that. So I think that's, I won't say differentiates us, but I will just say that helps us, in my mind, helps us be a better vendor.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but thank you so much, Greg and John, for this presentation and all of those thoughtful answers to those audience questions. And also a special thank you to FinThrive for sponsoring today's webinar.